Hello and welcome to Wyrd Wessex. My name's Andy.
And my name's Craig.
So, what are we talking about today, Craig?
Well, today we have tales of a curse, big cat sightings, several missing animals, ghosts, dead bodies, UFOs, occult practices, and possible links to Aleister Crowley.
All in one place, a place that we were supposed to go to, but due to weather and unforeseen circumstances, we have not managed to today. So, we're in the comforts of our own home.
Yes, but we are actually going to be talking about, well, mostly about Clapham Woods, or the general vicinity, I think we should say.
Indeed, we were ready to go. I've got my thermos flask here and my crucifix.
Is that to protect you from the curse?
The curse. I've heard of the curse. Do you want? Should we start with that?
It's probably the best place to start because I think it's kind of the earliest references we've got. So Clapham had a curse placed upon it in the year 1288 when Robert Le Falconer lost a case he brought up against a local parson, Adam Le Guest, for alleged bodily harm. Angered by his defeat, Le Falconer pronounced,
I call upon she who knows to damn this accursed village and all its meagre holdings. May the priesthood of this false god soon come to know their fate.
That is a proper curse. That is one of the cursiest sounding curses that's ever cursed.
And I mean, it's interesting because a lot of people do mention the area seems to have a lack of wildlife. There's a lot of eerie silences and things in the woods. So maybe the curse is what brings forth everything we're about to talk about.
I mean, without giving too much away early on, there are so many elements of this story or these stories that if I were to write a sleepy English countryside folk horror, I think would choose Clapham for it. You know, some more believable than others, but there's so many elements to this, starting with the curse and going on, that I really think make for a good story.
It's a little bit midsummer.
It is very midsummer, but
as in Midsummer Murders, not the recent.
Yeah, I got that. I got that.
Well, in case anyone wasn't sure about, I mean, we might have international listeners that don't know Midsummer Murders.
When we get into the cult, though, you know, maybe.
Yes. So, shall we start with some of the strange deaths that have happened in the area?
Indeed, there are 4 deaths associated with the woodland. One body was found inside the woodlands. The other deaths were either on the edge or associated with the woodland. I believe the first one was a police constable, Peter Goldsmith, who was a former Royal Marine, who was discovered in Bramble on the wood's outskirts 6 months after he went missing. I believe it was him. It was either him or another one. I've seen conflicting reports, but apparently it looked as if his body was placed there rather than. So they couldn't determine a true cause of death, but it did look like the body was placed there.
Yeah, it was under some brambles.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was supposedly like really like embedded in the brambles. Yeah, how he got there is kind of mysterious.
After that, in August of 1975, a missing pensioner, a little less suspicious, but nonetheless, Leon Foster was found by a couple who were searching for a lost horse, which actually kind of feeds into a later story. But yes, a pensioner was found there. They think he had just turned senile, unfortunately, and wandered away from home and died of exposure.
We missed an important detail on that one.
I did.
His body had undergone rapid decomposition, which is partly why they couldn't see what had caused his death.
Was that Leon Foster, the pensioner?
Yeah.
I heard that. I didn't see a story. I didn't want to mention it because I didn't see an actual a link to a particular body. I just knew it was one of the bodies. I was going to go into that a little bit later, but if we know, okay, that's
yeah. I mean, it appears as well he hadn't eaten or drunk anything for several days, and there was a bit of alcohol in his system.
I mean, I know under certain circumstances, especially when people are dehydrated or under certain stresses, weird things can happen with the decomposition rate, but yeah, that does seem a little bit odd. In 1978, the former Reverend of Clapham, Harry Neil Snelling, was found by a Canadian tourist in the woods or on the edge of the woods as well. Again, there's nothing published about the cause of death. Was it you that was telling me apparently they were quite a depressive sort of person. This
Yeah,
former.
he had a history of depression. He'd already attempted suicide several years before he became the vicar, I think. And then he became the vicar. But he was reported as being quite cheery on the day that he disappeared.
Okay, I mean, again, that can happen. Without going into too much detail, someone from Hertfordshire I knew, sort of the day he unfortunately took his life, he went into the pub and had a drink with everyone, was very cheery, and then just went. But yeah, that's one of the less mysterious ones, I think. Uh,
Well, yes and no, because he was missing for 3 years before they found his body.
you're right, actually, you're right.
And so it's actually his skeleton that the Canadian hiker found.
Do we know much about where in the area it was found, apart from close to the woods? Is there any description of the
Didn't
brush
see
or the
anything.
undergrowth?
No. I mean, you could say the Canadian hiker was suspect because they were due to fly to Africa and they didn't want to be held for questioning. So they basically wrote to the local police, enclosed
Oh, wow.
the dead man's wallet was included, and where the body could be found.
That is odd.
So we don't actually know who reported it other than Canadian, and I'm not sure how they know that.
Interesting. I guess it was local news report, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, you can see that with where this is though, with a policeman goes missing and turns up dead in a strange place. Then a priest a few years later goes missing and turns up dead years later, years after sort of his death. That's feeding into this folk horror story that I think should be told about this place.
Well, yeah. So, or the start of a really bad joke: a policeman, a vicar, and a schizophrenic walk into the woods.
Yes, that brings us to our last case, which is probably the saddest one, which was a homeless lady, Gillian Matthews, who was a schizophrenic, was found in the woods. But upon the autopsy, her body was given. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. It was actually a murder, and that was discovered in 1981. So
And that
yeah,
one was found in the woods, wasn't it?
yeah, that one was the only one, to my knowledge, that was found inside the woods itself. So yes, there's already. I mean, it's not a big woodland either. I mean, I know quite often people will turn up, sort of missing bodies, whether through murder or just people wanting to take their own life, or just through unfortunate circumstances like wandering off and dying. Quite often those things do happen in woods, but it's not a big woods. So having that, sort of over that relatively short period of time. But there's other instances of not people going missing, but animals as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't have many notes on many of the animals other than the horse. So there's a guy, he's riding his horse, he gets off to take a piss, and then he turns around and his horse is gone and it's never seen again. Where'd you go?
I'm here. I'm here. Um,
Just as I mentioned, the horse disappears, Andy.
that's
goes
it. That's
missing.
it. It's me. I'm the horse. But yeah, I heard that one as well and sort of went back, couldn't find it anywhere. No one local. I mean, again, could have been stolen. But yeah, it's an unusual one. I did find so a lot of these reports come to a few people and a book that was written that heavily looked into the area, which we'll talk about later. But it was a chap called Charles Walker who was heavily investigating the area, tied to a later topic we're going to cover soon.
I think he still is. I think he's sort of till the day he dies.
I mean, that's what he said. So he collected a lot of these, and unfortunately, a lot of these accounts are just anecdotal. So it's hard to trace. But there was a Mrs. Rawlings of Worthing who used to go dog walking in the area. Now, she took her black Labrador into the woods, and apparently it ran off, of being let off the lead, but it disappeared into the undergrowth, which it didn't usually do. It usually stayed within sort of line of sight. Now, the dog returned to her shortly afterwards and seemed fine. She took the dog home. As soon as the dog got home, it rapidly sickened, losing the use of its back legs, eventually collapsed. The vet had no idea what was wrong with it. It wasn't a stroke, it wasn't anything like that. And unfortunately, they had to put the poor thing down. Um, Apparently, when she went back to the woods later on to try and find if there was anything that the dog might have eaten or a trap that it might have got caught in, something it might have injured itself on, could find nothing. But she did have, and understandably, I guess, given what had happened to her dog, a very uneasy feeling in the woods. Um, and there's something about cats as well, wasn't there?
Oh, I forgot about the cats. Yeah. I only saw this mentioned in one place. I don't know how true this one is, but there is a mention that the police once found a pit full of skinned cats that had been staked to the floor.
That may well tie into another one of the subjects brought up today as well. So
It's all tied together. This is all based around the same woods.
yeah,
so
yeah. Bear in mind, this is all the same relatively small area of woodland.
I think you can walk through the woods in about half an hour. I mean, it's not big at all.
So yeah, as I said, there are multiple cases of animals going missing. Usually missing, some sickening. Um, there aren't many that have actually got names attached to them though. So I'm reluctant to go into them too much. Just some guy lost his poodle, some woman lost their Alsatian. But they talk about multiple cases, not just Charles Walker, but newspaper reports as well.
Yeah, most of them just seem to disappear, is what I saw. It's just animals that have just vanished.
There are also reports of people feeling very uneasy going into the woods. Now, a lot of those are going into the woods at night, which, in my opinion, as you know, I've mentioned before, I think that you go into the woods at night, you do feel uneasy because that's how we are. That's how we're built. You know, we're not night.
Nature.
Yeah, we're not night predators. We're not. We don't see well in the dark. You know, every instinct is screaming at us. There are things out here that do hunt things in the dark, even in England where there aren't anything like that, as far as we know, apart from the odd big cat and a black dog, I guess.
But that's it. So I mean, you mentioned that, so I may as well bring it up now. There is one reference to someone seeing a big cat in the woods as well, that kind of walks across the pathway and disappears.
Interesting. Do you know when this was?
I didn't write it down in my notes, so no.
It's all right. The only reason I ask is you get. I mean, we got a lot of big cat sightings nowadays, but also early 2000s and in the 80s. And in the 80s, a lot of that was put down to the laws around exotic animals being kept. And so the theory is a load of people who had illegal panthers and cheetahs and lynx. They were just sort of like just quickly letting them out, just letting them go free.
You could buy them from Harrods.
Yes, you could.
You buy all sorts of pets from Harrods at the time, lions and things. There is a film, isn't there? Going off track a bit now, but there is a film about a lion they buy and they release it back in Africa.
I think I know the one you mean.
I think it's called A Lion Called Christian.
That rings a bell, actually. That rings a bell.
Yeah.
So, if it was released in Africa, we know that the big cat of Clapham Woods was not Christian, then I guess.
Yes.
So what should we cover next in this mysterious short, small patch of woodland?
I think now's a good time to bring up the cult.
Yes. So I believe this first popped up in the 90s, late 80s, which bear in mind a lot of these are on the tail end of the Satanic Panic. So I believe it was actually first labelled as a satanic cult, and newspaper articles at the time talking about Clapham Woods were talking about satanic cult activity. But that's not.
They still
true,
do. The local newspaper, whenever they reference it, they call it the satanic cult of Hecate.
Hecate, which is wrong on several levels.
Yeah. So, as in case anyone doesn't realise, that should be Hecate.
I mean, I was wondering if it was just another pronunciation, but I know in Shakespeare it's Hecate, isn't it? So it's not even Hectate, that is just a complete
Yeah.
butchering of the name.
I
Um,
think it was a typo, and several articles after. If you look through the newspaper's archive, you find the same rehashed material.
so yes, this cult was a convenient scapegoat for a lot of people who were saying, these pets are going missing, and the feeling of it wasn't just unease people complaining of going to Clapham Woods. It was said that sometimes you'd go in. Go on, Craig. Craig's got his hands up. Go
I
on.
was just going to say, actually, we quickly give a rundown of who Hecate is for anyone that doesn't know.
That is probably. You mean everyone doesn't know who Hecate is? Go
Pretend like you've heard of her before. So Hecate was, or I guess is, depending on your belief system, Hecate is a goddess from ancient Greece. Most often shown holding a pair of torches, a key, or snakes, and accompanied by dogs.
Very important, that last note.
Yes.
I know she's a goddess of necromancy, witchcraft, life, and crossroads.
Yes, crossroads also quite important, I think, for the site. I've listed it as crossroads, entranceways, nightlight, magic, protection from witchcraft, the moon, knowledge of herbs and poisonous plants, graves, ghosts, necromancy, and sorcery.
If I were a suspicious man, I'd say that perhaps that is tied to those animal deaths and the animals sickening, is the knowledge of herbs and poisonous plants.
Yeah, her first appearance in literature is in Hesiod's Theogony in the 8th century.
Well done.
Yes.
I let you pronounce this stuff.
Her place of origin was, or is, debated by scholars, but she has popular followings among the witches of Thessaly and an important sanctuary among the Carian Greeks of Asia Minor in Lagina. Her oldest known representation was found in Selinunt in Sicily. Apologies to everyone for my butchery of the Greek and Italian pronunciation there. But yeah, so that's a kind of brief rundown anyway.
Again, keep skipping ahead, so I won't give too much away, but there is a local, there's a location locally to the area, which we'll talk a little about towards the end of the show, that doesn't have Greek temples, but is known for Roman temples, but not Greek ones. But yeah, this cult was blamed for a lot of it, like the dogs, lights in the sky, as well as the feeling of unease and potentially the deaths. Now, this Charles Walker, who's done a lot of investigating into the area, apparently received a letter from one of the initiates of the cult of Hecate, inviting him to a meeting, and this meeting was classic sort of clandestine, at night, at a crossroads, deep in the woods, and apparently this figure came from behind a tree, cloaked in shadow, and started talking about how there was a cult of Hecate operating in the woods. They'd been operating there for about 30 years, and they intended to carry on. The dogs were actually being taken as sacrifices to Hecate, and they intended to keep doing so and spread. That is Charles Walker's account. Apparently, he was very nervous. He felt very uneasy. Even before the meeting, he was tempted to turn back. He goes into great detail about how he nearly jumped out of his skin as this sort of disembodied voice from behind the tree greeted him. Apparently, quite well spoken, because he got a phone call from this chap as well. He'd been quite publicly investigating the woods at the time anyway, and had suspicions about this cult activity. Now, I do think it's important to mention before we go on as well that, you're looking at late 80s, early 90s. The idea, the sort of re-romanticism of witchcraft was booming. You had a lot of more positive spin on witchcraft stuff on TV, but you also had the tail end of the Satanic Panic, as I mentioned. So it was kind of in the public, it was kind of in the zeitgeist at the, sort of at the time, wasn't it? It was quite popular. And I mean, I remember growing up in Hertfordshire, there was this supposedly haunted church that cults and Satanists used to apparently use, called Christmas, which is a great name, by the way, this place. And it was an old medieval church tower, and that was all that was left of it. And you would find like broken bits of gravestones in sort of in pentagram shapes, and it was pretty well known among the locals that it was just kids trying to freak people out. So I think there may have been an element of this going on as well. Or like in Hertfordshire, there was as well. There was a supposed Templar connection to Hertford, and a chap from the Templars called up to give some cryptic warnings. And again, 99% sure it was just a chap trying to have a bit of fun. So that may be the case here. What do you think?
Yeah, I've read a few accounts that say it was probably a hoax and it was probably made to done to make them look like fools, basically. Because they
So
obviously go on to release it in their book, don't they?
yeah, so there was a manor house supposedly near the old church at Clapham, an abandoned manor house which was owned by one of the villagers, but it was for all intents and purposes abandoned. Apparently, there is a wall painting on there, and yeah, this painting found in this manor house is a sort of a horned figure, and they claim that was maybe sort of earlier satanic rituals there or a cult there. Now, again, in the 18th and 19th century, the upper classes really kind of went in hard. I mean, you've heard of the Hellfire Club, right? Um,
Hasn't everybody
you know, it's it's this whole
from Stranger Things?
yeah, that's it. But also the one in England. Like cave system under this manor house and sort of a lake you had to cross on a small boat with a ferryman and altars and stuff. And it was kind of it was a big thing in the upper class. It was basically an excuse to drink and practice debauchery. Which again, Charles Walker, I think, and there's a chap called Ian from Mysterious Britain that sort of goes quite in on the idea of them using this debauchery and sex and bribery to sort of keep the cult of Hecate kind of closed in and stop people revealing all about it. So, maybe it was just echoes of a previous thing, or maybe it was just all made up.
Yeah, I mean the only cult, if you like, cult. I don't know if you'd call them a cult, but the only the only group, I should say, the Friends of Hecate that I've found, I think they're based in Glastonbury,
Yeah.
so nowhere near this site.
Well, again, there is, and I think it was Ian from Mysterious Britain. Let me just check my note. Yep, it was. Who goes on to say how Clapham Woods, the activity in Clapham Woods, eventually subsided with Hecate. Not that he thought that it had gone; he thought they were still there, but the interest waned, and he thinks that they actually spread across the south coast. So I
Oh,
guess
well, that would, yeah,
that might be
potentially
him
back
saying, "Well, look,
that.
they're in Glastonbury now. You didn't listen to me, But I know I
I'd
feel
heard I'd heard as well that a storm knocked some of the trees down where they used to hold the rituals, and so potentially they stopped once their sacred trees had gone.
Yes, because there was a hide found there, which could have been a deer stalker's hide or someone just building a den in the woods. But apparently, it did have occult paraphernalia in there, like little jars with various liquids.
Porn mags.
Poor mags, that's it. Empty
Yeah.
buds, um, weird plastic bottle with a hose pipe coming out of it and some tinfoil. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, but yeah, no, he Charles Walker very much put that down to like as a space where they potentially prepared for their rituals. And he said he was very well hidden, almost like it was supposed to trick your eye and think it was a bush. But again, anyone that's built a den in the woods or wants to go deer stalking, that's exactly what you're looking for out of one of those things anyway.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't mention whether there was anything found inside the hide that would sort of link to the occult practices, if you like.
No, he sort of supposes it might be, but again, it was very
Yeah.
much it might have just been Little Den. I mean, I used to like leave. So friends of mine and I, when Blair Witch Project came out, we were like making little Blair Witch symbols and leaving them in woodlands and stuff like that. It was funny.
I did that too. They've moved out now, so I can probably say this. We had some new neighbors a couple of years back. This young couple moved in.
Yeah.
Um, and we'd got talking, and they were clearly a little bit spooked by the paranormal. And so on Halloween, I made some little Blair Witch sticks, and I hung them on the tree outside their living room window. So when they opened the curtains in the morning, they were like, "Fuck!"
I like that.
I think I'd met them that week. Like, welcome to the neighborhood, guys.
So yeah, what's your takeaway on the cult of Hecate? Have we got anything else to talk about them, or what's your? Do you think there is anything there?
It is possible that people have done stuff in the. I mean, we know from woodlands all over the place, people do these rituals and things. Well, one of the reenactment events we do is a witches festival. You know, there are people out there that are practicing with various gods, goddesses, and Mother Nature or whatever you decide to call it. So I could believe something would have happened. I think they're jumping to a few conclusions, Walker in particular.
Yeah,
I think it's almost like he says they find occult symbols. I've seen various people say about ribbons tied to trees in the woods.
I
The
think
kind
any
of
old tree that gets a story around it gets cluties attached to it. You know what I mean? That just happens. There's some yew trees over at Knowlton Rings. They're old. This is near Wimborne in Dorset. It's a medieval church, abandoned medieval church. It's just a shell surrounded by a Bronze Age temple complex, and there are two yew trees. I don't know how old they are. They might not be as old as the complex. Probably not. You know, let's face it, they're not that old. They might not. They probably date back to when the medieval church was there.
yeah.
But again, you always find offerings left there, cluties. I've attended a ritual there. I've attended a Samhain ritual there. So it is actively used, but they, a lot of them are fairly open about it now, because that stigma isn't
Yeah.
there. Like the pagan group that meet in the woods in Hartford, they have their meetings every month down at one of the local pubs,
Yeah.
But then when I was growing up, I dated a Wiccan, and they'd have their rituals in the woods, and they wouldn't want any of their parents to know that they were practicing magic because that stigma was there. And
Yeah.
so yeah, they used to go off into the woods and do it, and it was quite, sort of discreet. So
But then you'd imagine, so based on the timeline, that kind of makes sense that they were being discreet back in the 80s when this sort of satanic panic was going
yeah,
around. But then as things have progressed and now people are more open about it, you'd assume at some point a group that was based there would go, oh, yeah, that was us.
yeah, this is true. Unless, of course, a load of people say, "Do you know anything about those missing dogs?" And even if it weren't them, you might not want to draw that.
There is the missing dogs. I guess you wouldn't want to take ownership for.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting because we watched a video actually about Charles Walker and his sort of experiences there before we did this show, and the place where he met the chap. There sounded like there was quite a busy road nearby. Do you reckon the dogs might have just, meow, Do you reckon they might have just been?
Some of them maybe, but all of them.
This is true. This
What
is
about
true.
the horse?
Again, we've only got verbal accounts of this, haven't we? A lot of these, so
Yeah.
But then why would you lie about your dog going missing? It seems like, if you're going to make up a lie about supernatural activities, oh yeah, I saw those cultists. They, you'd make up something a bit grander than a missing dog, I guess, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we want to go into more grand stuff, I think we could move on to a little bit more ghosts and UFOs.
I think so.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of. We'll segue into UFOs because obviously the last episode we did was UFOs. So I'm sure.
Yeah.
If you're not into UFOs, sorry, but we have got a few more coming up. I've just got a couple of little kind of notes because, as we said, there's not necessarily a lot of information about these things. But in 1974 at 11 p.m., I like that it's specific about the time, doesn't mention the date. Just 11 p.m. in 1974. Some friends were walking through the woods when one of them was suddenly suspended in the air and then dropped to the ground. And then a year later, this one I find slightly interesting because this goes back to the big cats almost, is in 1975, a strange mist was seen that took shapes including that of a grizzly bear.
Interesting.
But subsequent to that, they find an 8.5-inch paw print and hair at the location that the misty bear was seen. And a Geiger meter finds high levels of radiation.
So that kind of feeds into it. So from what I was going to say, you've actually covered two of the things that are on my notes as well. But There were strange lights in the sky sighted in the early 60s. Again, it's very vague. I've seen one that said it was 64, another one said it was 62. So
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure, possibly both of them. This was around the time people were going into these woods and feeling unwell. And apparently, people going with Geiger counters were going along and finding, as Craig mentioned, higher levels of radiation. I don't know whether they were high enough to make you feel sick that quickly, anyway. But upon looking at the geographical data on the area, it's on a big chalk bed. You know, it's a big, it's one big chalk deposit underneath. Now, chalk isn't one of those sort of things that kind of has its own sort of low level of radiation. It's pretty clean for that. So they're not quite sure why it was that radioactive. But yeah, that was put down to a lot. A lot of people put those two things together: the UFO sightings and the radiation. Of course, 60s, 70s, people start talking about military testing as well. But interestingly enough, the UFO sightings start to peter out once the idea of the cult of Hecate comes in. So people just like shift the blame. But there were reports of missing dogs happening around in the 60s and 70s, what people were then blaming on the UFOs and abductions rather than being sacrificed by a cult.
I mean, Sussex in general still has hundreds of sightings of UFOs every year. It's still
it's a
one of the
very,
biggest in
very
the country.
heavy, yeah. Just tied to Clapham Woods, though. I didn't see that many sort of from later on.
Yeah.
It's funny actually, because I thought we are going to be traipsing around woods doing this, and possibly evading ghosts and spectral sort of grizzly bears. Interestingly, there's no actual. I don't think we ever had grizzly bears here. Cave bears, yes. Brown bears, yes. But not
It
grizzlies.
specifically said a grizzly bear, which maybe it's like I think I mentioned on the last one about the pets, the alien pets, like
yes,
Bigfoot.
Yes.
And the fact that the radiation could have been the UFO collecting their bear back.
I like that. Yeah,
let them out for a wee.
They picked it up in America and then thought, oh, we didn't let it go for a poo before. But although I think a lot of people, they see a big, massive bear and they instantly go, grizzly bear,
Yeah.
But I did, as I said, I thought we were going to be traipsing around the woods. So my notes are like scattered in various places through my phone and notepads. So
don't pretend like that's not what you normally do.
Yeah, that's it. It's like, oh, where's my note on it? Oh yeah, right. So on UFOs, we do have a few accounts though. So the first one going back to the 1700s. Not quite sure when in the 1700s, but there was an old woman that apparently saw a bright round shape like the full moon. She described it.
Was it the moon?
It may have been the moon. It floated down the woods and disappeared in the bushes, like probably over the course of an evening. Then the woods were filled with the fumes that, and I quote, stinketh of burning matter. Could have been a meteorite, could have been a meteorite. There is actually a crater in those woods that people attribute to a World War II bomb. Maybe that was it.
Yeah.
But the old woman was then struck down, smitten with palsy, and was given a wide berth by the locals, who were quite superstitious about that sort of thing. You got any accounts?
Yes, quite a bit more recent than that. 1967.
Okay.
So in the village of Rushington, which is technically a few miles away, but if you're a spacecraft, it's within reach, right? Two schoolboys, Toy Newton and John Arnold, had a strange story spout out to them on a Ouija board.
Toy Newton, we know that name.
Co-author of the book that we spoke about with the cult. Although I think he's listed as the actual author, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so Toy Newton and John Arnold had a strange story spout out to them on a Ouija board. The message claimed that the wood was used as a base for spacecraft and that one had landed to fetch supplies of sulfur and other chemicals. Unknown to them, a few months earlier, Paul Glover witnessed multiple UFO sightings that seemed to show exactly what the message had said.
Interesting. Is this something Toy Newton got a bit creative with, or is it something that sparks off a lifelong interest?
Toy Newton is a very academic and legitimate researcher into the occult practices. With
so I gather.
with such book titles as The Occult Origins of the European Union.
Was that co-ordered with David Icke by any chance?
So make of that what you will, people.
Okay. Well, so I've got one, just
quickly, actually. So on that note, they seem concerned about occult practices in the woods, both him and Walker. We know that Toyne, as I've just said, did a Ouija board as a kid.
Yeah.
In the video we watched earlier, Walker is doing a Ouija board.
This is true.
So the only occult practices that are happening are with the people that are concerned that there's occult practices happening.
That might go towards the villagers' feeling towards them. So there is an account from 1968, so just a year later.
Okay.
A saucer-shaped object was witnessed by an insomniac. Very clearly point that out. An insomniac doesn't name the insomniac. While glancing out his kitchen window. Apparently this was about 2 a.m. or so, and he saw the object hovering directly over Clapham Woods. He immediately called the police. When they arrived, the UFO had disappeared.
Interesting. So I've only got one other one that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is interesting in itself, because as I say, the site is rumored to have hundreds of sightings, but I can't find many actual details, which is a bit of a red flag, I think. But in October 1972, a telephone engineer driving home along Findon Road saw a large saucer-shaped object in the sky before making a circle of the area and zooming off. There was also another report that came from a couple walking near Furlong in West Sussex who thought they saw Venus low in the western sky until it started moving north very quickly. When the object was over Clapham Woods, a beam of light descended vertically from it and then rapidly withdrew before shooting away to the northeast.
Picking up that grizzly bear.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Actually, that was actually 3 years prior to the grizzly bear, might I add.
Ah, fair enough. Well, maybe they're dropping it off. Interestingly, some of those accounts with the sort of hovering, moving, and then zipping off, it's kind of similar to that UFO sighting from last episode from Hartford that Andy bloke saw.
Oh, yeah, you can't trust him though.
That miscreant. But yeah, no, that was it. Kind of almost rings true to what I saw. You know, that sort of zipping off. But
yeah, it's kind of classic UFO, isn't it? Beams of lights and zipping off, and yeah.
Mine did not look like a craft though. It was just sort of a glowing ball. But anyway,
get that checked out.
We're not here to talk about me or my glowing ball. Incidentally, the dog disappearances, like while they had been reported before then, they tend to kick in a sort of mid-70s, it seems, when you actually start getting decent accounts of them. So yeah, you know, I said some of those were blamed on UFOs, but I think people, you know, they continued after those sightings had sort of had their heyday. So I guess that's why they were blamed more on the cult of Hecate, or at least by certain individuals.
Have you got any more UFOs? Or because that was the only ones I could find.
Those were the only one, the actual accounts I could find. Yeah.
Yeah. I just find that suspicious. I mean, there's supposedly hundreds of sightings, but there's not even a Dave Smith saw a UFO over the woods on this day. There's just nothing.
Interestingly, in the short documentary about Walker, there's none of the villagers interviewed. And I realise you can get selective with these things, but none of the villagers interviewed mentioned UFOs or cults or anything really. But none of them mention UFOs. And you think if you lived there for that long, you would have maybe seen something. But I don't know. There's lots of UFOs seen around Bournemouth, and I've not seen one here. So you know, it's.
But in the same vein, then, so I've seen Clapham Woods being mentioned as one of the most haunted woods in England.
Yeah.
Did you find any ghost stories?
Not really, no.
I didn't find any. I mean, you got that boy that was hovering, maybe.
I wonder if they've just used haunted as a catch-all for like weird shit. Essentially, that was the impression I got, because I'm not seeing any evidence of ghosts there.
I think we need to teach people of Sussex. I mean, they're talking about satanic cult when they mean Hecate. They're talking about haunted woods when they mean alien spaceships. Come on, people.
Grizzly bears when it's clearly Bigfoot being dropped off for a wee, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said you did find a couple of bits though. Have you got anything?
On ghosts, let me look. Yes. So there was one that stood out for me actually, which, funny enough, is tied to a chap you've probably not heard of before called Charles Walker.
Oh, yes, here we go.
So, it was a friend of his, Ian, who I mentioned before from Mysterious Britain. He went to check out Clapham Woods by himself. He knows Charles, they're sort of associates. Charles wasn't there. There was a reporter with him from a local independent newspaper. It doesn't mention the newspaper, who contacted Ian, knew that he was looking into the woods, and said, "Can I come with you?" And so, on Charles's recommendation, they went into these woods. Now, Jean, who was Ian's wife, who is Ian's wife, went along as well to these woods to have a look around. This is a bit more recently. And they went to the back of the church. Apparently, the church there has had no paranormal activity there, no attacks by cultists, although, you know, that might be because you probably don't want to attract attention. I guess if you're a cultist, I don't know. You know, attacking the church is a bit sus. So Jean, Ian, and this reporter, they leave the back of the church, and there's a turnstile, sort of a gate. Sorry, you sort of hop over to get into the woods. So the reporter goes over first. Ian helps Jean, his wife, over the turnstile. Apparently, as soon as she climbed up onto it, she felt herself grabbed from behind, ripped away from it, and thrown sort of back and sideways into a barbed wire fence. Apparently, she just jerked backwards and flew into this barbed wire fence. Ian did point out that he had to talk her into coming. Not that she was scared necessarily, but it was kind of a him hobby, this whole supernatural thing. It wasn't...
How many gins did he give her before she left the house?
I wouldn't want to accuse, you know. But yeah, was it a dramatic slip, or was it being pulled by a ghost? But this force apparently grabbed her, threw her sideways into this barbed wire fence. She got a nasty gash on her arm. They bandaged it up, but it kept bleeding, and they thought, okay, we actually, rather than bandage, we probably should go to the hospital. She might have tetanus, you know. So yeah, apparently they didn't continue that investigation, but it shook them all up quite a bit. So that is the only firm ghost sighting or story or something that could be linked to a ghost that I found in those woods, apart from the uneasy feelings that people get and the sort of, you know, the feeling of doom or unease that people get when they go into those woods, which have been attributed to UFOs, the cult, ley lines. You know, those could be a lot of things, but so you didn't find anything else?
No, other than feelings of being queasy, those kind of descriptions. But other than that,
Gin will do that.
Yeah, or radiation from a UFO.
This is true. Going back to UFOs, actually, Hatching, which is a village just down the road from there, there are reports of crop circles there, and I think that's actually potentially why one of the reasons the reporter got hold of Ian is because of these crop circles. Like, I'm doing an investigation into these. Can I come with you into Clapham Woods? So there have been reported crop circles around the area as well, and again, that is more recently than the 60s and 70s. So there was another ghost story that I think we were looking into as well from there, thinking about it, because Charles Walker on this documentary, they use a Ouija board and they contact.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that's quite an extensive story, that one. It was a highwayman by the name of Jack Upperton.
Yeah, so I think maybe we should save that for another day, but I've had a brief look and I think there's quite a bit to go into with his story. So
yeah, so according to Charles and his Ouija board, anyway, this ghost of this highwayman who did pass through the area apparently, and died not too far, sort of on the way to Arundel, died not too far away. I think he was hanged close by eventually. His ghost they supposedly contacted, but didn't have any trouble from him. So yeah, I think Jack probably deserves his own story at a later date, I guess, really.
Yeah, or it might even just make us a little short on social media.
I
something
expect
like
you to
that.
go there to report on it, make up for what we didn't do today. um, so we've covered cults, we've covered disappearing dogs, we've covered ghosts or lack thereof,
Yeah.
we've covered UFOs, we've covered curses. What's left?
So not specifically to the woods itself, but there's a nearby site called Chanctonbury Ring, and it's often
Yes.
connected with it.
And certain individual as well.
Yes, who we did tease at the beginning. Alistair Crowley.
Now you say Crowley, I say Crowley, but the interesting thing is, this is our second go at recording this bit. As soon as we mentioned his name, the call froze, and we had to start this again. So
I got booted out of Zoom. I mean, that
that's
was
it. Didn't like you.
down. So sorry, Alistair, but
We're talking
yeah,
about it. If Ozzy Osbourne, so can we.
I mean, I wasn't going to go into him too much because I'd like to cover him at some point, but
As
there's
you-
a lot to cover.
We were chatting just before recording, and as Craig mentioned, then we could probably do a week's worth of episodes on Alistair Crowley. There's a lot.
I mean, I believe I said a month.
All right. Well, I'm being really. We don't want to do a month on Alistair Crowley.
It's Alistair Crowley month for Wyrd Wessex.
The guy was a bit too weird.
In case anybody hasn't come across him before, he was into a lot of occult practices, lots of sex magic, and he possibly summoned the Loch Ness Monster, I think we mentioned on a previous episode.
Yeah, a ritual that was open and never closed, right?
Yeah, that may have opened a portal at Loch Ness that brought upon the Loch Ness Monster. I think that's all we need to really cover for him at the minute. I mean, he did live nearby.
Yeah.
And at the time he was living with Victor Newberg, the poet. And they were both convinced that the site was a place of power.
Yeah, this is Chanctonbury Ring, isn't it?
Yes, sorry. So not the woods itself, but they thought it had power. And Newberg did publish poems about the power of the site, and he did, like, in the poems, he'd imagine druidic rituals and sacrifices.
So yeah, there was also a travelogue done by a chap called Robert Le Falconer, who slept there over a summer's night, and apparently was woken up by this unearthly sound of screaming, which is pretty unsettling. But if for anyone who's slept out at night in a wild place, quite often that's just a hare or a rabbit being killed by a fox or something, But it can be pretty unsettling, especially in a place like that.
Fox screaming is pretty unsettling.
It is, especially when they're like, sort of mating season and everything, It's really,
yeah.
I used to have a load live beyond my house, and really keep you up. But I mentioned earlier Roman temples. I believe there were actually some Roman temples found there. Got some notes here. At least 2 Romano-Celtic temples were built, I think, inside the site. So again, Romans quite often did this. They'd take an earlier site and sort of use it for themselves. We've seen it up in Maiden Castle, for example. There's an old Roman temple there. I'm not sure if there's any information as to who the temples were to. Probably not Hecate, but Hecate.
No, I mean, so the original site is 4th century before the Romans used it. Yeah, the reason they know about the Romans I find interesting as well is that the Great Storm of 87 that swept the south coast of England.
Yes.
It pulled up a lot of trees. And that was when they were able to actually investigate what was underneath and found out about the Roman temple.
I think the actual precinct there, though, dates back to sort of 200-300 BC. I think they were even talking about possible. They've found remains of pottery dating back to the Bronze Age there, so it was occupied before then. But it was reference to a Roman copper sort of plaque found with a boar on it. So there might have been a cult around that. And they found like jawbones of pigs around there and stuff like that. So it definitely was an important site. And Alistair Crowley sort of really attached to this, didn't he?
Yeah. But I do have one more story about the Chanctonbury Ring.
Go on.
ties perfectly into the folklore nature of the podcast. So it's rumored that it was created by the devil himself,
Oh, yes.
and he can be summoned by running around the clump of trees 7 times anti-clockwise. And when he appears, he'll offer the summoner a bowl of soup in exchange for their soul.
Some versions of the legends are a bowl of milk as well, I believe. I've heard it with a bowl of milk, but annoyingly, when I thought we were going there, I've got a wooden bowl. I was going to just sort of whip out on the video and stuff, but the gag's ruined now. Yeah, so we could have got some free soup if we'd have gone today.
I mean, it depends what kind of soup he's offering. I mean, if you can you imagine he offers you his soup in exchange for your soul, and like, I do like a good soup, and then it's just like a bowl of Heinz tomato or something, or
Yeah, that's it. Or I don't know, liver.
oh, liver soup. Mm.
No, no.
Oh no, bit of tripe soup.
Oh, few jellied eels in there.
Ah, fuck. I gave him my soul for this tripe soup.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So many of those places they have these. It always involves running around something anti-clockwise, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There was a church where I grew up, this old Norman church, St Leonard's in Benjo in Hertford, and the route. I remember someone telling me if you run around that church around midnight 100 times and knock on the door, the devil comes out. It's like 100 times. It's like I
Wow.
think if I run around that thing 100 times, I'd be ready to meet the devil. I'll just collapse.
You wonder where those things come from as well. Like,
Yeah.
they're easy to disprove, aren't they?
Well, there was that whole thing, and again, I don't know how much of it is modern takes on it and how much is sourced. I'd have to look into it. But you walk sunwise. You walk sunwise, apart from certain times in the year when you can walk anti-sunwise or anti-clockwise. Um, so I guess it stems from that. It's always running anti-clockwise, like against the
Yeah.
grain, like against the natural order of things. So I guess it comes from that. But I think I
Mm.
remember seeing like at least like 19th and 18th century sources on like stuff that involves walking anti-clockwise or against the sun. So it's quite an old belief. And I guess that's just one of the ones that's endured.
Yeah. There was one mention actually of going back to ghosts again, of a Saxon soldier. I think probably died at Hastings.
Ah,
Why he goes to Chanctonbury Ring afterwards, don't know.
I think a lot of the time it's these landmarks and people just want to tie important things there. But it's a lovely
Yeah.
story. Maybe he lived there, maybe he lived close by, and came home. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And then I mean, again, it's one of those sites they say there's a lot of UFO sightings. You're 15 minutes away from Clapham Woods. So I think if you see a UFO, it's in the vicinity.
Yeah, a lot of
Again,
hill
no
forts.
details though.
A lot of hill forts, and I mean, we discussed this briefly in the UFO episode about, sort of how they kind of came in to replace
Yeah.
fairy folklore, and a lot of hill forts you find UFO sightings, and it has that replaced the fairy folklore that used to exist at those places.
Or is it the same phenomena and always has been? But we just
Exactly.
give a different name to it.
So I think that draws us to a close on Clapham Woods and the surrounds, doesn't it?
That was a very full episode, I think. That's there was a lot to cover in a short space.
Yes. Do we do the reveal on what we know about it, or is our scorn sort of show through on the episode?
I think it will be pretty obvious by now. So most of the information does seem to come from Walker's book, doesn't it?
Yes. And Twin Newton, is it?
Yeah, so technically I think Toyne Newton is the author. What was the name of the book again? The Demonic Connection was the book by
Yeah.
Toyne Newton, co-authored with Charles Walker and Alan Brown, I believe. And yeah, a lot of it seems to come from that. We've already mentioned that potentially they were being wound up by someone in the woods with that meeting.
Yeah. I mean, for me, final verdict, it's really hard to take a lot of it seriously when the sources seem to be verbal accounts that aren't referenced from just those guys, you know? Um, it's a wonderful story, or wonderful stories. Got a lot of good building blocks there for things, but it's really, yeah, it's really hard to find sources that aren't secondary to that, you know, that aren't initially stemming from that book. I mean, they've done a brilliant job, you know, even on its Wikipedia article page, Clapham Woods is listed as, you know, a place with all of these sightings and hauntings and everything. But it all stems back to that book, it seems.
But then I think you said Toy Newton is sort of disassociated with.
Yes, he's refusing to have anything to do with any publications about that stuff. I think he doesn't want to know any more people. You know, people who come to him saying, "Oh, you wrote this book. Can we talk to you about Clapham?" He's not interested anymore. Whether that's because he doesn't believe it, or he's just sick of it, or he's moving on to accusing.
He's still
European...
writing similar books, yeah.
Yeah, just he's decided his next target's the satanic origins of the European Union or whatever the cult supernatural origins was it. But yeah, as I say, for me, there's not enough there to really cement it as thinking, okay, that place is definitely weird.
It sounds good, you know, we plugged it in the intro, all this stuff's happening there, and then you go, actually, when you dig into it, we can't find any real ghost stories. There's only a couple of UFO stories, and yet it's meant to be the most haunted and the most visited UFO site. And like, is it though? Where's the stories?
If we decide to go there at some point and then end up going missing, we will eat our words, I guess. But, you know.
So yeah, decide for yourselves. We either didn't go because of the weather, because the story's a bit naff.
Yeah, we sort of,
or because we were pussies and we were scared.
Well, I mean, yeah, we sort of, yeah, we had a chat about it, and you know, the weather was what stopped us, but really we were just scared, or potentially didn't think that there was enough.
Yeah. Well, it's enough to cover. As we said, it's an interesting story.
But not enough to cement our view as like, okay, there's definitely something weird going on here. But
yeah,
it's, yeah, as you say, it's definitely just the story in itself. And that, after all, that is how folklore gets made. You know, so much of this folklore, it's a story being adopted by another area or another group, and then it grows. And so, you know, potentially these guys, they are instrumental in starting this like folklore, this very colourful folklore around Clapham Woods.
So the question really is, with all this change of plans today, did you remember to find some weird news?
Just. It was more like I very much. I was like, it crossed my mind when I was getting ready to go. I was like, are we going to do weird news today? Are we going to like report it from where we are? Or are we just going to record it later and add it at the end? Will we survive long enough to find some weird news? Will we be the weird news when we disappear? But yes, I do have some weird news. So this is from a source that I draw from quite a bit, the Metro.
Our sponsors.
Yeah, pretty much at this point. Asparagus fortune teller predicts the future, and it's bad news for Team GB. And this was published at the end of last month, the end of December.
Okay.
So, a fortune teller who correctly predicted Brexit and Andy Murray's Wimbledon win has revealed her forecast for 2024. I just want to put in, I love how the fact they don't explain straight away what an asparagus fortune teller is.
No, I'm down. I mean, I watch Bluey and they have magic asparagus, so I'm in.
Yeah, you went quite recently to see Bluey live, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, just a couple of days ago.
Nice.
Big Bluey fan. Yeah. If you don't know magic asparagus, it's a Bluey thing. So I didn't even consider that was weird. I was just like, yeah, okay, magic asparagus.
As the new year rapidly approaches, oh, this is wonderful. Asparamancer. That's my new D&D class or band name.
I want to be a Asparamancer.
Asparamancer. Jemima Packington, great name, has used her decades-old technique of throwing asparagus spears into the air and interpreting how they land. Oh, it's like runecasting and bones and stuff. That's wonderful. Jemima from Bath, of course, began making predictions aged 8 and said she inherited the gift from her elderly aunt who used to read tea leaves. I was really worried it was going to be on the smell, like if your pee smelled or not, you know. Her technique hasn't changed in all those years, although not all of her predictions for 2023 came true. Metro asked to predict what we'll see in 2024. This year, Jemima thinks there will be a worldwide regime changes as people become increasingly fed up of how they're treated by their governments. We've got an election coming up. Fingers crossed.
I was going to say, that's a bit of an easy one.
You know what I mean? Yeah, and so have America.
Yeah.
She reckons there'll be separations and divorces amongst the royal family, and events in the Middle East will reach a breaking point. So the predictions, I might do a best of, because there's like 15 of them. Regime change take place through the world and at an unprecedented scale, often where least expected. Is that Trump getting back in? Who knows? People are increasingly tired of the way their leaders are treating them. Mention the royal family divorces. Do not be surprised to hear news from Montecito. The culture of celebrity will be on the wane. Ordinary people will want to concentrate on their day-to-day battles with rising costs of living and will lose interest in the antics of so-called privileged few. The 24 Olympic Games will not be a resounding success for Team GB. Events in the Middle East will reach a breaking point. World opinion will change yet again. Extremist group within the UK will lose support. No more holding up traffic or supergluing infrastructure. England FA will appoint more female referees to officiate the all-male team matches. So far, I'm getting very obvious things from here, you know?
I can say they're either obvious or a lot of them are 50-50. Like winning a tennis match was 50-50. The Brexit vote was 50-50. Do you see what I mean? Like,
there'll be a shake-up within the UK education system. The onus of many responsibilities will be forced back onto parents and not teachers. Deaths amongst world leaders will occur, and the US will see their first female president. Okay, that's an interesting one because I don't think there's a few. I think the Republicans have got a couple of women running in the sort of running for that. I forget their names. I'm just the only one I remember really is Donald Trump, you know. But yeah, there are some women running, I think, and if Trump does end up getting locked up, maybe. Mental health and well-being will continue to be an important factor worldwide. This will no longer carry the stigma of old. Again, that's already changing. People recognise that our next generation need our help and support. More public figures will be outed as having abused the system, profiting from illegal actions. Again, UK will see a return to active politics from a previous leader. I mean, that kind of happened with David Cameron.
I was going to say, that's already happened.
That's already done, so maybe, I reckon we're getting Blair back.
What's the date on the...
This is literally, I think they asked her this mid-December, so Cameron was already back at that point, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so it could be someone else.
I'm just doing all 15, it turns out. Climate change will become a victim of compassion overload. A raft of very well-paid TV personalities will lose their jobs. So-called influencers will lose their sway as people realise the real world they live in that matters.
That's when they start listening to Wyrd Wessex, man.
That's it. Yeah, come away from it.
That's real people.
We're the ones you want to listen to. The experiments also predicts the US will see a first. Yeah, it goes on to just break down some of these. In 2021, Jemima predicted Christmas celebrations would be a modest affair, which was the case in many households as Omicron took hold. In 2019, so she was doing this a while, like, you know, sort of publicly. Correctly predicted cricket success for England, Big Brother returning to our screens, and US romantic musical A Star Is Born winning an Oscar. Before that, she correctly saw Andy Murray winning Wimbledon, a Euro crisis, and the credit crunch. Explaining her fortune-telling techniques, Jemima said, "My technique has not changed, and I still cast the asparagus spears to interpret the patterns in them. Seeing the patterns for me is instantaneous, possibly because I've had years of practice. I'm usually about 75 to 90% accurate in my predictions. I go through my predictions each year and think, yep, that's happened, yep, that's happened. Occasionally I get one slightly off. or I haven't quite read it correctly, but I'm never far off. I predicted Boris Johnson would become Prime Minister about 4 years before he did, and everyone laughed their socks off. So there you go. That is my weird news. Some of it not so weird, but just the notion of an asparamancer I find wonderful, wonderfully weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the headline was the leader for that one.
100%, 100%. A lot of these weird news ones, I'll read the first bit and think that's weird or that's not weird enough. And purposefully, I don't read the entire article because I want to be surprised by it as well, you know?
Excuse for sloppy journalism.
Go on then, show me how it's done.
All right, well, I found this about 5 minutes ago.
Excellent, leading the way.
Because I forgot that we needed weird news. Frantically looking for something.
You were counting on us and our bowls of soup being the weird news.
Yeah, I was hoping we were going to disappear.
I imagine most of our listeners do at this point, you know. It's...
all 5 of them.
All 5 of them.
For peek behind the curtain, guys, we started this at 10 a.m. It's now 1:30.
There's been multiple cups of tea, wee breaks, and video viewing since then. So
we watch YouTube videos together. Yeah, this one comes courtesy of the Daily Star, and the headline is "Cannibal Carried Bag into Police Station and Horrified Cops When He Asked for Help."
Help to eat it, cook it?
So, a witch doctor horrified police when he started pulling out human body parts from his bag at the station. Nino Mabatha was a practitioner of local traditional medicine and claimed he'd been forced to eat human flesh by 3 other men. He arrived at Escott police station for help, but cops only believed him when he showed them his bag. Constable Ryan Nitzilichi, I think. Apologies to Constable Ryan. Yeah.
Ryan.
Ntshalintshali.
Yes.
Watched in horror as a hand was pulled out, followed by a foul smell of decomposition. And then it's quoted, "It was at this point that I told him I was placing him under arrest under suspicion of murder," he said, adding he was shouting, "I need the police's help because I'm tired of being forced to eat human flesh." Yeah, so it says the case of Mabatha, a practitioner of local traditional medicine, or Muti, was selected as one of the most shocking examples of cannibalism in recent years. After being cautioned by police, Mabatha led officers to his home. When they got there, the smell of rotting bodies removed any doubt that the suspect was telling the truth. One officer later testified, "I followed the accused into the room where he retrieved a small dish. Inside, I saw something shaped like an ear and what appeared to be jaws. He then picked up another bucket that appeared to have intestines in it." Mabatha, 33 at the time, told the horrified officers that he hadn't been alone in his cannibalism and he'd been forced into it by 2 other men. One of them was a local butcher, which raised concerns that some of the body parts may have found their way into people's shopping baskets. People asked locals who made missing persons reports to try and identify the bodies, but since most of the bodies had been dismembered and mostly decomposed, no one could, except for one.
So they did find one of the victims' families then?
A 24-year-old mum who had recently gone missing was identified as one of the victims. It emerged in court that another man, Lungasani Magobeni, had approached Mabatha to perform a multi-ritual to help him have good luck. Mabatha suggested they kidnap a woman or child and kill them as the ancestors insist that blood needed to be spilled. Magobeni and Mabatha were later convicted of kidnapping, raping, and killing Zanali before dismembering her and eating parts of her body.
Whoa.
Zanali's grandmother identified the clothes she was wearing at the time of her disappearance, and much of the victim's body was later recovered from an impoverished grave. There were 2 other defendants in the horrific cannibal trial. One of them, Sifan Biso Sitol, 31, apparently killed himself in his cell while on remand. And Khalil Lamula, 32, was acquitted due to lack of evidence. There you go. That is my happy story to end the podcast.
That is a happy story. I kind of wish we'd have done it the other way around in a way. I don't know much about Muti. I know that some of the practices involve cutting bits off while people are still alive. It's pretty horrific, you know. But yeah, that was quite a shocking one to end on.
So that is Wyrd Wessex for another, I'm going to say month, but I think we're going fortnightly or going to try to.
Yeah, we might not always stick to it, but mostly if we haven't disappeared or something. And I think while the weather stopped us, I think or the curse maybe, I think we do need to get out there and do something in person soon. We got a few ideas, haven't we?
I'll lift the restraining order for a day and let you come out with me.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
All right, so thank you for listening to Wyrd Wessex. I've been Craig.
And I've been Andy. Until next time, stay weird.